Before I go ahead and introduce our virtual roundtable colleagues, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to both work and learn on this land. So let's dive in, and I'm going to start actually sharing a bit of my journey as an education administrator who's been working to incorporate sustainability into various administrative practices, strategies, and initiatives within the great unit that I have the opportunity of leading here at HEIs. And as I'm sharing my journey, please, by all means, do take the opportunity to share in the chat why and how is sustainability relevant to your work at this point in time. So I have been in the field of education all my career. I formally joined the post-secondary space probably around, I can't even believe it, 10 years ago. But prior to that, I worked in industry, in workplace learning, talent management development. And prior to that, I started my early career in the K-12 education sector. And admittedly, for me in higher education, I would say I stumbled upon sustainable development goals in around 2016, in part because at the time I was examining global competencies and the work that was happening in various global contexts on future skills and the future skills agenda, which was emerging in the Canadian context back at that time as well. And there was an awful lot of discussion and a lot happening in the media at the time, particularly around large Canadian employers speaking to the needs for skills and aligning to government interests in this space as well. And it was at that time that I happened upon some documents that were coming from our financial services sector and some of the big five, as we call them, the Canadian banking sector. And one report that came into my purview, and also a former employer of mine, the Royal Bank of Canada, issued a report around its impact and measurement reporting. And I'll share that there. Thank you so much. And this report was the first time that I saw the Sustainable Development Goals being referenced in industry in this particular way. Naturally, I knew about impact investing. Whenever I thought about sustainability or being introduced to it, I understood in the context of climate and climate action. But I hadn't been introduced to this notion of the global framework or Agenda 2030 until around this time. So I became more curious. I started to dig more. I wanted to know, well, how would this even translate into my current work in higher education with focus on skills and global competencies? Where do these things start to correlate and connect? And I came across Monash University's piece on, really it's a working guide that introduced about sustainability and the operating conditions of the university. Monash University, located out of Australia. And it was the first time that as an education administrator that I'd seen this kind of a working guide that was articulating where and how sustainability could have an impact and could be oriented in all aspects that are the condition-making activities of post-secondary entities and universities. And so I was enamored a bit by that and wanted to continue to learn more. I, at that time as well, happened to attend a conference in Montreal that was focused on internationalization in higher education. And I remember sitting in a room of about 200 plus academic leaders, government officials, all speaking about the internationalization strategies for Canada. With a lot of focus on student mobility really at the time. And one panelist back then, who was representative of our Canadian federal government, had made mention to Agenda 2030. And I remember hearing that and popping my head up to say, wait a second. So when the mics were open for questions, I asked this particular panel what higher education leaders, all of us in this room, needed to know about Agenda 2030 and sustainable development. And what struck me was the comment that our federal government officials said that if a higher education institution is not aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals, it is not fulfilling its mandate. So I took that very much to heart. And from that point, I committed to myself wanting to become as informed as I possibly could about Agenda 2030 and these Sustainable Development Goals. I wanted to improve my knowledge and comprehension. And naturally, along the way, I've been introduced some phenomenal colleagues who've been very gracious in sharing their insights, in introducing me and bringing me into a whole host of different communities of practice, sharing research, articles, come one, come all. I found a very engaging and welcoming series of communities, both in Canada and internationally. It's like one of those things, perhaps when you first start to see it, and then you find others, and perhaps, you know, oh, now I see more. Kind of now I'm much more conscious than I was before. So since this time, I've been working really diligently to think about where and how, and as a team, and the team that I have the pleasure of leading, do we integrate this agenda and understand sustainability in the context of our work? I would say, from my perspective, it is absolutely a journey of continuous improvement, but I'm really grateful again for the colleagues I've met along the way. So in that context, and sharing that bit of a journey, I'm really excited to introduce colleagues who have, again, most certainly facilitated introductions for me, and just delighted that they're joining us here today as well. So with that, our virtual roundtable colleagues, welcome to introduce, and I'll just have you all say hello so we can make sure to test our mics. Mr. John Beale, who is our manager for the Sustainable Development Solutions Network for Canada and with the University of Waterloo.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
And thank you, John. And welcoming Dr. Valerie Lopez, an international scholar, education consultant, and professor with Seneca College and HEIs, University of Toronto, as well as an advisor of the University of Central Asia.
The number one rule of turn your mic on. Hello.
Wonderful. Hey, Valerie. And Mr. Jacob Taylor. Hello, Jacob, a fellow of the Center for Sustainable Development with the Brookings Institute.
Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, John. Hi, Valerie. Hi, everyone. Hope my mic's working. Good to see you.
Mic is working. And I'm just curious, Jacob, where are you joining us from today?
From DC today.
Okay, DC, good. For just so colleagues know, Jacob traverses different continents, and maybe you can tell a little bit by the accent, an Australian accent happening there. So I was half wondering, I thought, oh my goodness, is he up at the, in the middle of the night joining us from, thank goodness not. So welcome from DC.
Thanks.
And welcoming Tanya Sherry, Director of Health Leadership and Learning from York University. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So pleased to be here. Welcome also, and pleased to join my fellow panel members, and welcome to everyone joining us today. I'm so pleased to contribute to this conversation.
Wonderful. All right, so let's dive in. And again, chat is open. So please do feel free to share what it is about sustainability that you're working on and working to advance. And as we're engaged in our conversation, the chat line is open, and we'll look forward to addressing questions as they pop into mind. So let's get started. So I'd love to start with you, John, or just to ground us in, first and foremost, what are the Sustainable Development Goals? And perhaps you can provide some background for our broader colleagues as to how they came to be developed.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So, the SDGs, as I'll refer to them, Sustainable Development Goals, at a high level, they represent 17 goals on kind of what a better world looks like. And all 193 UN member states came together in 2015 to adopt these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They represent progress on social, economic, and environmental sustainability, kind of codifying, what sustainability means beyond environmental, which I think a lot of people still might kind of reference when they think about sustainability. So there's 17 goals that kind of range in topics from no poverty, good health and well-being, climate action, reducing inequalities, creating international partnerships, affordable and clean energy, responsible consumption and production, and others. And so kind of a wide range of topics that they're looking to cover. And really kind of at their essence, they are a roadmap for the world that we want. It's kind of like, if you think about what's your vision for a better world, I think this is kind of what world leaders have come up with in 2015. And kind of the aim of the SDGs is really to help guide and accelerate the transformations that we need for sustainable development. So they're meant to be universal. There's previous international goal setting, like the Millennium Development Goals, that largely were seen to apply to the global south or developing countries. The SDGs kind of expand on that and say, well, actually, these are issues that affect all countries around the world, all parts of societies. They're meant to be indivisible. There's 17. If you look at it's quite a nice, colorful 17 goals, each one of them in their own box. So there's, it's tempting to say, I'm going to work on this particular one, but it's important to remember that they're indivisible. Progress on one will lead to progress on many other of the goals. So they're deeply linked. They're meant to be transformative. So that's another area that I think we can't understate. There are big changes that are needed, and the SDGs are really trying to push for that. And they're meant to leave no one behind. We can't rest on our laurels to say, well, we're 97% of the way there in terms of access to clean drinking water in Canada. That last 3% is going to be the hardest to reach people in Canada. In our case would be remote Indigenous communities. And for the SDGs to be a success, we need to get to 100. And it's kind of that leave no one behind push to say, 100% is our goal. So, briefly kind of where they come from, there's been a lot of sustainability work in the world over the last 50, 70 years. I think we can look at, in the early 70s, there's reports on running computer simulations on kind of growing population, economic growth, and what that looked like with finite supply of resources on the planet. And they saw a couple different scenarios. One was overshoot and collapse. One was finding kind of the right balance on the planet. And that's led to a lot of different work, the planetary boundaries work that comes out of Sweden. Many have seen it probably. How many Earths do we need to support our human lifestyle on the planet? Which has kind of shown where are we overshooting, where are we at risk? And that's led to a lot of other international meetings, in the late 80s, talking about sustainable development at the UN, defining that term. In the early 90s, the Rio Earth Summit, precursor to many of the climate protocols that we have today. And then the Millennium Development Goals in 2000 to 2015, and then 2015 to 2030. This is the range for the SDGs. So we're right in it. We're halfway there, and we're not on track to achieve. So I'll leave it at that, but that's kind of a bit of an overview.
Well, it's a great overview, and thank you so much. And the Millennium Goals, prior to what we have today known as Sustainable Development Goals, for sure, from an education standpoint, there had been a focus on primary education and access. And then we had the introduction of lifelong learning, and really the higher education as a sector hadn't been engaged in the Millennium Goals, but they were engaged now for the Sustainable Development Goals. So I always say, in fairness to the sector was formally introduced at the start of 2015 and being called upon. I'm just curious from your perspective then, John, like why, the highlight perhaps for our colleagues, like why the higher education sector is so important to advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, do you think?
Well, I think, at their heart is the kind of the transformations that we need. One of the transformations in reducing poverty and creating conservation, in our water systems and on land, tackling climate change. So post-secondary, I think, are kind of a first place to go in terms of drivers of innovation, economic development, societal well-being, new ideas, businesses being incubated. Campus is a really vibrant place in terms of trying to create change and kind of lay the foundations for change towards the SDGs. And, you know, I think, you know, we can look kind of more small scale, I guess, you know, on the campus and how the SDGs kind of play a part. And we're talking about training of students, growing that generation of global citizens, but also using the SDGs to help frame, you know, the kinds of problems that students may want to help solve in their careers. You know, so I think there's great opportunities there. The SDGs are this big picture agenda. And so for our post-secondary institutions, they can demonstrate kind of, you know, the progress that they're making on the big issues that we face in the country or the region or kind of, you know, around the world. And, you know, so I think post-secondary seems like a very natural fit in terms of the types of progress, the types of ideas, the types of mobilization and convening that we need to kind of bring society together, you know, to take action on the SDGs.
Thank you, John. I'll bring Jacob in on that as well, because I know, obviously, Jacob, you've been working extensively and doing an awful lot of collaboration with the higher education sector. And from your perspective, why would you say that higher education is integral to advancing sustainable development?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. And I just wholeheartedly agree with what John has set out. I think, you know, nailed it on both setting up the SDGs, but also talking about how universities are really well placed to be leaders and hubs of progress towards the goals. I kind of come at the problem with the hat of an anthropologist, and thinking about, you know, these goals as a framework for collective intelligence and how does that play out. And when you think about universities as almost like a microcosm of the kind of systems we need to really make progress on each individual goal, but also the whole kind of set of goals at once. Universities are super well placed for that. You know, and as John said, the SDGs are really unique as a framework that combines this need for technical expertise across a whole breadth of issues, but also an ability to understand the trade-offs and synergies across all of the issues. And so when, you know, in the project that I work on, the 17 Rooms Initiative, we're trying to devise a process that can help drive action within each goal, but also kind of cross-fertilize across action-focused groups as well across the goals. And so universities have been a real natural first mover to test out and experiment with this methodology. You know, all of the 17 constituencies are more or less represented within a university context. With, you know, you have a lot of, as John said, a lot of young energy driving the kind of values, and then a lot of established expertise. And I think universities, when you think bigger picture as kind of, in terms of what the world needs, kind of resilient hubs that are steeped in a kind of value of knowledge and science, also intergenerational exchange as well, is such a crucial part of these goals. So universities' capacity to bridge generations and the perspectives that can bring is really important as well. So yeah, I think crucial place to start, and we've been really excited to see so many universities pick up the 17 Rooms process and figure out how it might work for them locally. I can jump more into that, but I want to make space for other comments as well.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And I think it's a great segue in terms of some of the initiatives and the practices that are being applied. And I know certainly both yourself, Jacob, and John, you've been involved in initiatives that are spanning both nationally and internationally. And perhaps just back to you, John, in terms of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, for the benefit of our colleagues joining today, if you can share a bit about, you know, what is it, what role has it played in advancing SDGs in the higher ed sector?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's SDSN Canada, Sustainable Development Solutions Network. I'm the manager for this network in Canada, and essentially we are a network looking to engage Canada's universities and colleges on the SDGs to take action and make progress. We're hosted at the University of Waterloo. We launched in May of 2018, and since then, we're a network, we're member-based, it's a free membership, so it's kind of more just, trying to bring in those that really want to take more commitments on the SDGs, but we've really seen the membership grow a lot. And I think it reflects a deep interest in Canada's post-secondary for the SDGs. We are part of an international SDSN, it's an international initiative, 1,700 member institutions around the world, 50 national and regional networks. So it's been great to kind of found this Canadian chapter, but be part of this broader international movement as well. So, I talk with colleagues around the world, sharing ideas, what's worked in, Mexico or in Sweden, and how can we maybe adapt that in Canada? And so that's been really exciting. In terms of some of the kind of areas that we're trying to work on, the natural places for universities and colleges are around research, around community engagement or convening, and education. And so kind of those are our three buckets that we focused on. And within that, initiatives kind of vary. So we have, we started the Together Ensemble conference, which is an effort to bring all sectors of Canadian society together regularly to talk about SDG progress. And so we want to put, the minister responsible for the SDGs on a panel with business leaders and university presidents to talk about what kind of commitments are we making on the SDGs in Canada and how can we drive that farther. We've founded a couple of communities of practice. One is a Teaching the SDGs community of practice. So for faculty across the country who are teaching or are interested in teaching, let's share innovative approaches to teaching on the SDGs. What kind of resources, readings do you use? Just creating that kind of dialogue that people can learn from and engage with each other and bring that into their class. We have also one on localizing the SDGs, which is more kind of municipally focused, and how do we ingrain the SDGs in our municipalities. We have a vibrant youth network across the country, engaging students on their campus to learn about and take action on the SDGs. We have an upcoming report, probably in early 2023, on reporting for the SDGs. And we are also organizing Canada's first national SDGs week on university and college campuses. So that'll be in the first week of March of 2023. So finding ways to bring people together around the SDGs, to spotlight them, and to try and deepen commitments on our campuses.
And I remember kind of first reaching out to you and meeting you and then joining. And I would say maybe there was 8 institutions maybe at the time when I think I first connected, and now just seeing the growth has been quite something, and the levels of participation with SDSN Canada is amazing. So thank you for that orientation. Thank you so much, Perry, for sharing a bit of that link as well. And another initiative, and so just going back to you, Jacob, around the 17 Rooms initiative, I had the great pleasure, just as context for colleagues, we introduced the 17 Rooms within the University of Toronto, and had the great pleasure of connecting very directly with Jacob at that time. And so perhaps you want to just share a bit for the benefit of colleagues, what is it and why did it get started and how is it being received thus far?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, so the quick primer on 17 Rooms. I think the basic spirit of the initiative is, these goals are very powerful as a shared framework, particularly as coordinated by the UN. But ultimately, the way they will be achieved probably won't happen within the kind of core UN system, because the type of actions and approaches that need to take place are going to happen outside throughout the full range of societal actors. And I think ultimately will only really happen if people have ways to take the goals into their own hands. And so in that spirit, 17 Rooms is trying to create a very widely available set of tools to help communities anywhere take the goals into their own hands and particularly think about practical next steps that can be taken within each goal and across the goals, to try and get a little bit away from the idea that these are big, complex, intractable issues that are happening far off and outside of my domain. Instead, we're trying to flip that and say, come into rooms, come bearing all the priorities and pain points that you experience locally in your community, and get together with like-minded people to do something about it next year. That's the kind of spirit. And so we do a flagship process, which is really aimed at global scale impact, bringing together global leaders around the goals in 17 separate rooms or working groups. But then increasingly our focus is on 17 rooms X, which is what we've seen universities really pick up strongly, and now increasingly in other locations as well, cities, municipal regions, international regions, picking up this process, organizations. And that's really about self-organizing around locally driven actions for the SDGs. So yeah, that's the primer on 17 rooms, Elizabeth.
Thank you for that, and thank you so much for inserting the link there as well, Perry. And of course, to our panel colleagues, if there are other resources and links that come to mind, we'll capture those as well, and look forward to sharing with colleagues who are joining today. I do want to bring both Tanya and Valerie into our conversation, though, and perhaps with yourself, Tanya. I shared a bit of my journey in terms of how SDGs came into my professional conscience. I'm just as curious, how do they come into your professional conscience, and how is Agenda 2030 informing your higher education work and practice in your role?
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I've just enjoyed so much listening to both John and Jacob, sort of detail their work in the SDGs and of their organizations. This is so fascinating and as well as inspiring. So for myself and for us here in Faculty of Health, I've kind of joined the Faculty of Health about 12 years ago now, but started in healthcare and working within hospitals that kind of naturally embedded what were the pre-SDGs, into the work they did, because we want to keep people healthier longer. We want to encourage people to live healthier lives and be free to make their own decisions around their healthcare as well. And sort of that is at the core of how we run here in HLN, our Health Leadership and Learning Network here at York University, but also it's at the core of what I myself, as a professional, what I focus on trying to achieve for the learning that we offer our learners, our students that come to us. So for us, we in focusing on keeping people healthier longer, and for myself, that's a responsibility. And a responsibility we don't take lightly, but also we can look to as a way to be inspired. And through the programs that we offer, through the people that we educate, and also want to encourage to come back to us, and for the sort of freedom we give them when they come to us and learn, and the trust they have in us that as their teachers or their even mentors and coaches, they're in a safe, trusted space where they can explore new ideas that they can then take back to what they're doing and build and create a better world, honestly, for everyone to live in. And they can now attach that definitively to the SDGs through the education, through education that we can offer. Keeping people healthier longer, for myself personally, for the instructors that work with us, for the students that come to us, it's a global impact. Yes, it's local, but it has a reverberation that can be expanded globally. And it can connect globally. So many of our students now are online. They are not only national and local, but they're international as well. So we can see that reverberation, that domino effect. And ultimately, obviously, the learning that I'm so connected to and passionate about is that sees that the SDGs are underpinned by a healthy world. And good health outcomes. so people aren't constantly chronically ill and, you know, leading lives that are become miserable because of their chronic illness. But they can access healthcare that is fulfilling and can address the state that they're in. It can help them lead, you know, more fulfilling and safe and healthy lives. And then they can be those citizens who can continue to make, you know, the next best decisions around supporting the SDGs. We see our learner not only as the person who's impacting change, but also living the change themselves. So it's really kind of the mantra where we're living, the space we're living in right now. And we feel we've been connected to the SDGs all along, but seeing them in writing was inspiring, and it kind of validated all the work that I think that the health industry to date, whether it be in North America or globally, what we've been trying to achieve. And thank you for putting up our link. Appreciate that.
I really appreciate what you were sharing there, Tanya, and that just kind of struck me. And so again, for benefit of our colleagues, Tanya and I had my privilege to connect with Tanya via task force that we were working on together, focused on lifelong learning. But what I'm so appreciative in terms of how you speak about sustainability and its connection to your work and the work from a York University perspective and the division that you're leading is the meaning making that came from that and connecting. And I know for myself too, as a professional in this space, being introduced to sustainable development in the framework. Again, my angle obviously with the quality education, but where and how that reverberates. But it got to the ethos of why higher ed, right? Like, you know, this is about where and how we engage and connect for societal good. And that brings another kind of impetus and meaning and connection to the work, and being able to see the impact that one can have locally and tangibly, but knowing that there's an interconnectedness globally was just in many ways a bit of a shot in the arm that I know I kind of call upon, that kind of rejuvenates almost like the shock system, right, to the heart around. And this is why we do what we do. And I think we're all looking for more meaning and connection in our work. And I value the framework from that perspective, because the day-to-day kind of focus on the tactic or, you know, all of the things that we may have on our to-do list, but it's one of these models that has continues to connect and inspire and serves as a reminder. That's from my perspective. I've always found when I've heard you speak, that's what's resonated, just how encompassing it's you kind of express the work.
Thank you. Thank you. And it is, I thank you for expressing it in that way too, and just bringing it also back to professional learning, lifelong learning in this journey, which we're now bringing from the implied to the explicit. This is what happens. We continue to learn, and whether we do it on our own through coaching and mentoring, or we're doing it with the university, with a college, or with a mentor, it's necessary, and it's something for us to support and encourage as providers of higher ed.
And Valerie, wanted to make sure your voice is here, and perhaps the same question, you know, how the SDGs came into your professional conscience, and when you think about Agenda 2030 and this global framework, how is it informing or connecting to your work?
From my perspective, I would, you know, kind of follow up on what Tanya said and say that sort of the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN, or just goals, have always been a part of my professional, personal sort of scope of knowledge and concern. perhaps because I am from Guyana. I came here as an international student many moons ago, and a huge proportion of my family still live in Guyana. So it's that I've always played this. It's always been this, like, you know, I'm learning in the global north and constantly thinking of how it impacts countries. That at one point Guyana was right up there with Haiti, with one of the most underdeveloped countries in that part of the hemisphere. And so for me, the whole idea of, you know, very much grounded in sort of, I have the saying in my office, and it says, you know, that sort of philosophy of Nelson Mandela, where education is the most powerful weapon that we can use to change the world. So from my professional practice, that's sort of what drives me. And I think, you know, based on what John and Jacob have said, you know, if you're looking at poverty, if you're looking at the environment, it really doesn't matter which one of the health, which one of the sustainable development goals you're looking at. If we could somehow educate, then that, I think, has a great impact. So luckily for me, I actually started my career in the healthcare sector. I'm a cytogeneticist with a degree in life sciences from U of T. And my sort of midlife crisis, depending on how long I think I'm going to live, is I decided to sort of get more into education and went back to school and did a master's and then a PhD at OIC, because I thought sort of my goal would be to use that powerful weapon to kind of see if I could make some kind of change within my little area of where I maybe can have some impact. And I ended up at Seneca College and did a lot of work with the international, in our international department there. And as you know, colleges, the whole mandate of colleges is reflected in many of the goals, right? Access, you know, gender equity, all of those things are part of sort of the fabric of a college education. So specifically, I think in 2015, I got involved with the Aga Khan development agencies and education agencies, and started doing work first with Seneca, with the University of Central Asia. And I also did work in Tanzania, and I've done work with the International Finance Corporation, and sort of places with very different philosophies on education and how you might be able to impact you know, the UN development goals. And for me, the big, you know, the answer to the question of how do they inform my work today is that they inform actually every aspect of my work. And because I think of all the things that we need, we have a lot of education policy that are aimed at addressing inequities, but less attention is paid to all of that is silenced within the collective wisdom as we try to inform and we try to progress these goals, right? So my interest is the whole idea of contextualizing education to the places and spaces where our students live and work and be. Right. So from Seneca's perspective, you know, we have a huge international population, but it's really of Central Asia that I think really deeply addresses, if you want an organization that is really working towards, you know, using education to impact all of the other goals. And I could spend days talking about how that is exhibited and sort of actually really done. But so I think that the whole idea here is, for me, it is all about forming partnerships. And, you know, I just, for instance, found out today about the 17, is it 17 rooms, Jacob? I hope I remembered that right. And, you know, even the SDSN Canada, I didn't, so I'm doing all this work that I think is very, is very connected to the goals. I didn't even know these places existed. I didn't even know these initiatives were there until Elizabeth invited me to be part of this panel. So I guess I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but you know, my sort of, how are we going to focus? Where are we going to put our attention? How are we going to sort of examine the established dominant knowledge and learn to unlearn as we try to actually have an impact, you know, using more traditional Indigenous knowledge, you know, really listening to the places and the spaces and the countries that we work with, and not just bring a North American kind of perspective of what is education and what is and how is it structured. And so a lot of work to be done. And so for me, my professional practice is an ever evolving sort of circle of how can I impact within the context of you know, I'm very concerned about what's happening in the rest of the world, and not just our focus here.
No, and I appreciate that. And I agree. I think also, interestingly enough, I think as professionals in the space, you know, if you come with curiosity and you can create the space and go and source, I mean, it's amazing. I think the communities that you can find along the way. And more and more, you know, our sector is, you know, being held to account in a whole host of different ways. And I think about things like, for example, global rankings, right? So we know the global rankings are being influenced and bringing on board expectations and measuring and impact with sustainable development goals. And that's something that catches the eye and the attention, obviously, of the sector in terms of they matter. Some have often referred to as the ranking system as a way of governing our higher education sector. And so I'm, you know, knowing that we've got these expectations of the sector, and we have, as professionals, kind of feeling and finding our way, and in a way, kind of in an organic way, trying to advance in our professional learning and development in this space. I'm just kind of, you know, curious, and I'm going to call upon Tanya in this as well. When you think about that and these initiatives and what are ahead of us, what would you identify perhaps as some of the skills required for higher education professionals today to even consider on how might they start to advance on sustainable development within their organizations? Oh, sorry, Tanya, I was directing that to you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure. Oh boy, I've got a list. But I think, oh my goodness, the skills for us as an industry is what you're asking, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Yes, and as units also that are interconnected with a larger university or college system. So we have to remember that. For myself, I was thinking about this because I saw the list of questions beforehand. I was like thinking, where would I start first? And for me, it always goes to, when we examine our own, what we're providing and the skill sets we need to do better, like connect to the SDGs, we have to first understand the value proposition of what we're offering to our communities. What is in our education that is building that value proposition for the communities we serve, and that includes our global communities. Like the courses we offer, the programs we offer, the education, the learning, that they're taking away from us. Assess the value proposition of this. And I think Valerie just put it nicely. We have to learn to unlearn. We have to sort of show some humility in assessing what we're already offering. And is it meeting the targets? Is it aligning? And if it's not, we have to have conversation. We can't just make assumptions it is. And it's very hard to do that in our world. Things are moving so fast. There's a lot of pressure for sustainability, even inside of our colleges and universities. But we have to slow down and examine that and use the skills we've been given, or reach out for additional skills to sort of assess our value proposition, and also ensure that it's aligning well with our brand, and the power of our brand, because our brand can support the achievement of the SDGs. And we have to have that skill set to know, so what does our brand represent? How are we representing it? Is it aligned? Are we misaligned? So we are not, we're not using it to our best, the best that we can. And this also includes, you can see in here, skills around discussion, negotiation, bringing on new partners, creating new partnerships, and being open to innovation. Innovation, say, in new formats of education we may be offering, like the advent of the use of micro-credentials with digital credentials, which is opening up a whole new world. It's rather disruptive, but it gives us more of a global reach and a global value. And this can cause a little bit of turmoil inside of our units, because operationally, structurally, we may not be able to just turn on a dime and say, okay, let's do it differently. Let's do it this way. But that's essentially what, at the core of it, for me, it's value proposition. There is negotiation involved. There's connection to the larger brand. There's always this design thinking. Here is a new term, this design thinking, ensuring that we are relevant to the communities that we're serving. Yeah, and but again, it can be a tough dance initially, but and I know we've done it through COVID. We've just come out of a lot of change in our various units across Canada and the US. I know we all have. So maybe we can use that as an inspiration to continue that change and align ourselves nicely with the SDGs.
Thank you for that, Tanya. And I want to bring Jacob in on that as well, because Jacob, when you've worked with a whole host of different institutions and even introducing 17 rooms, which kind of serves as a launch pad into advancing and in partnership and partnership development, and of course from your anthropological curiosities and interest in innovation, what are you kind of seeing in terms of what is it that leaders in this space kind of need to harness in order to advance these sustainability initiatives and goals in their organizations and sector?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Elizabeth, I really agree with the points that Tanya has made. But maybe just to take my anthropologist hat and run with it a bit, I think there are probably three key things that I see. One is an ability to drive action. Two is an ability to foster communities around those actions. And then thirdly, I think, personally, I really think the SDGs need ritual as well. And that's a very anthropological term. But just to break those down, I think, what we see within our rooms, in the 17 rooms process, is kind of emerging. We're seeing some ingredients emerge in terms of what really helps drive action. And I think, getting a group of like-minded people with diverse professional or personal expertise and viewpoints around a common shared problem can be a really powerful way to surface new approaches. And so learning the kind of skills of that process, how do you run a meeting? How do you get people into a room? How do you set a goal but still allow for flexibility to take new courses based on shared insights? That's a really powerful skill set. Secondly, we realize with SDG problems, they're not typical problems. And in fact, that by definition, they require multiple stakeholders to come around a problem in a new way. And so, we have Y incubators to churn out companies, or, we have kind of templates and processes to create single problem solutions. We don't have a great skill set for creating solutions to kind of multi-headed problems. And what we're learning is that fostering community can create a really powerful foundation for that, those complex scale, more complex problems, because they provide the kind of holding pen for much more diverse ideas and collaborations and insights over longer timescales. And the third thing is this idea of ritual. Like, how do you get people pumped about the SDGs? How do you get people inspired on a very human level? And that starts with kind of frank human to human conversations about what matters most. But then I think needs to scale up to really, how do you communicate about these problems in a way that people see themselves in the solutions and can be, kind of motivate a more collective spirit around achieving the goals.
And I know absolutely that the idea of the community of practice, the peer connection is being so critical in terms of the 17 rooms design and what's kind of built around it. Similar for the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and just wanted to get your sense on that too, John. Like, why do you feel that peer connection and that community of practice is so integral to this initiative?
Yeah, I think people are looking for each other, right? And so it gives an opportunity for people to find one another that are working on these issues and just really learn about new resources, learn about new approaches. Even from today's session, Jacob and I have connected a couple of times, and we'll continue to do so. But Valerie and Tanya are new to me, and as you said, Valerie, as well, I've been taking notes from what you've both been saying, and I think I'm looking for opportunities to kind of bring you into these communities and share some of that work that you're doing. So I think it really helps expand your network, let's say, your thinking, and really find kind of what are the best ways to advance this work. So at a higher level, I found it really, really useful, and us as a network, it's kind of like our raison d'etre as well, as how do we connect institutions across the country that are doing this work and want to take it further, and how can others learn from that? So a quick answer to say, I think it's actually been very critical to the kind of work that we're doing.
I'm really mindful that we're all so fast approaching the top of the hour, which I can't believe, because I have like a gajillion more questions that I would want to be able to ask. I'm just mindful. I'm just monitoring the chat, and I'm not seeing any questions, but just being mindful where we're at on the top of the hour. Maybe we'll just start with our close in terms of advice. From your perspective, and what advice would you provide to education professionals in higher ed who are seeking to learn more, advance their professional efforts, or kind of navigating and thinking about initiatives that they're trying to bring together, create rituals? What would be some of your kind of closing comments and recommendations? And perhaps I'll start with you, Tanya.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I would say just a couple of things for all of us, because we're all part of the same community in this professional learning space. Continue to create safe spaces for your learners, and continue to challenge them, and incorporate EDDI in that, and help them, be supportive of them, of your learners, including your staff too, to incorporate EDDI into the education you're providing, creating those safe spaces. Remember, as universities and colleges, we are the place where people can come to challenge society, to challenge the norm. That is sort of that beautiful space that we've been given, and it's maintained by our deans and protected by our presidents, our provosts. So let's take advantage of it, because we can support change in this world. We can support the SDGs by doing that. Be brave, be innovative. It can be challenging operationally to shift, but if you're persistent and brave, and put together your good business proposition, but also be accountable, continue to be accountable to the learners that you serve. And I know we're all we have a lot of humility in this across our industry, because it's necessary on a daily basis. But if we remember our learners that we serve continuously and stay connected with them, and because they can inspire the innovation and they can help us in the real life decisions around how we can connect with the SDGs through conversations with them and learning, what is really at the heart of the issue and how can we incorporate that into the education we provide. Thank you again, everyone. It's been such a lovely.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And maybe a few words from yourself, Valerie, words of advice.
Well, I think we got a lot of policies. So I think we have way too many policies. And I think that's the easy work. And I think we tend as higher education, especially administrators, to focus on, we have a policy for HEI and we have a policy to address inequities. But I think we got to go back to more about what John and Jacob have spoken about, and Tanya as well, is this idea of ritual and community, and finding spaces where we can connect with individuals who are doing this work. And I think we really have to take a deep look at that thing that is almost impossible to change, and that is what I like to refer to as habits of mind and culture. Like we have to start developing the skill set, and I'm not sure how to do this, of changing our habits of mind, changing what we think is the dominant knowledge and the way to go, and focus much more on the networks and the communities, and individuals who might be doing this work in spaces that are not recognized at their institutions or are not focused, because I think there is a lot of brand building, Tanya. Like I think there's a lot of that happening, but there's not as much as should be happening in practice. So that's just my kind of, we're doing a lot of work. It's hard work. But I think we got to step away from the policies now and look more at the real nuts and bolts. But again, like everybody else, thank you very much. It's been an incredible learning experience for me, and lots of new resources and things to check out.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And I realize we're at the very much top of the hour. Colleagues have to go. I do want to just say a big thank you, John, Valerie, Jacob, Tanya. Thank you so much for joining. Some wonderful resources being shared. I do encourage colleagues to check out SDSN and the 17 rooms, rich resources to download and review. We'll be gathering other resources and we'll follow up in an email. Also excited to share that we're also launching a professional learning fellowship with the first one about advancing SDGs. So excited about that. And I continue to be excited to continue the work with colleagues with Brookings and SDSN. And of course, I have the great privilege of connecting with these colleagues with great frequency. So maybe we'll have to do a part 2, because I do think we need to chat about what does this mean in actual practice, moving beyond awareness and into practice. But thank you all, and we will follow up again with recording and resources. And I just want to wish all who joined us today a fantastic rest of day.